So here we go in 3, 2, 1. Physics, science, disc golf.
Zeus just picked up the disc and flicked it off the course and said, "You don't get to play with that one anymore."
Mind blown.
Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Zen Disc Golf Podcast. I am your host, Patrick McCormick, a.k.a. Zen Disc Golf, the author of Zen and the Art of Disc Golf, and the Dr. Dre of the Zen Disc Golf Podcast. Also joining me is Tim Stewart, a.k.a. Mind Body Disc of the Mind Body Disc blog and the MC Ren of the Zen Disc Golf Podcast, as well as Chris Bowden, a.k.a. Disc Golf Chris of DG Puttheads and the DJ Yella of the Zen Disc Golf Podcast. Zach's not joining us today, but it's obvious who he would be. He is the Ice Cube of the Zen Disc Golf Podcast. So it's really unfortunate because I think he would have enjoyed that label. So
I think he would too.
Shout out and rest in peace to Easy. We're coming straight out of Podland to give you the best in disc golf entertainment, as well as a little mind and body growth to help you on the course. First, here's another tool for success to throw in your bag. If you've read my book, Zen and the Art of Disc Golf, then you know the value that I personally place in both meditation and visualization as tools that you can use to both play better and inject positivity and success into your life. Visualization in sports has been scientifically proven to improve athletic ability and has been shown to produce approximately 7 times the improvement that can be achieved if an athlete only practices physically, proving once again that success begins truly in the mind. And there's several types of visualization that I recommend using when gearing up for your next tournament, practice round, or for your own general improvement in the sport. The first 2 types of visualization should occur before ever hitting the course. The first I call micro-visualization, and this is visualizing individual shots to improve your overall ability on the course. And by this, I mean visualizing over and over again yourself making putt after putt or drive after drive. The second is macro visualization, and this is visualizing your entire round shot for shot from hole 1 to hole 18. And if you think this sounds a little woo-woo, consider this. For decades, Olympic athletes have been trained to visualize getting the gold. Nicole Detling, a sports psychologist with the United States Olympic team, states, "The more an athlete can image the entire package, the better it's going to be." And if you do a little research, you'll also find out that many pro disc golfers also utilize visualization to dramatically improve their game. As a matter of fact, disc golf world champion Avery Jenkins has been quoted stating that it has proved successful when I can already picture the disc going into the basket moments before it actually making the putt. When you can envision it happening, it will happen. So if visualization is good enough for Olympians and pro disc golfers like Avery Jenkins, I recommend you taking this idea seriously. The last type of visualization I recommend takes place on the course. You should take a few seconds before throwing every shot to view in your mind the flight path and the landing of your disc where you need it to be. Using these tips, I guarantee will lower your scores on the course. And a little last food for thought here. If visualization works this well as in sports, imagine what it can do for your life. Take the time before heading out each day to visualize how you want your day to go. See yourself succeeding in all your endeavors and goals. And don't worry so much about the how. The act of doing this daily opens up mental doors that with time will show you the how. Another tool to throw in your bag. So today, guys, we discussed earlier, I wanted to talk a little bit about windy weather play and get a few of your insights and tips. We've all played for a little while and we've all experienced way different weather, but I was out on the disc golf course this past week with my son, and man, the wind just started to pick up. And I just said, okay, well, here's a great time to kind of start experimenting with some things. Do you put high, low, or during wind into a headwind? Do you put low into a headwind? What do you disc down? Do you disc up? Just things I started thinking about and kind of experimenting with. And I wanted to get a little bit of your insights and tips. And I'm sure other people out there would be real interested to see what your findings are. And then when I started talking to both Chris and Tim, I found out that both of them had written great articles on windy weather play. So I've gone kind of back in time and started reading their articles. I was like, what a great opportunity to talk about windy weather disc golf.
Yeah, it's, I run into a lot of people. And when I first started playing, I really tried to play every day. And I did end up playing every weather, every condition. I just had to get out and play all the time, and kind of getting back to that now. And I was always kind of disheartened when I would talk to people and they go, I don't want to go out and play because it's a little cold, or I don't want to go out and play today because it's windy. And
right.
And if you never play, but when it's 75 and sunny and perfect out, unless you live in California, you're never going to run into that all the time. So, then I'd run into the same people at tournaments, and it would be windy at the tournament, and they would just struggle. For me, it was just kind of old hat, because my home course is pretty windy on the front part.
Right.
And if you're used to it and you get used to playing in it, and you get, a lot of it's confidence, especially the putting part, just having done it so many times before.
Sure.
Once you get into a competitive situation, the practice in those conditions really pays off. So I would encourage everybody, whether it's wind or whether it's snow or whether it's even rain, or I've played in sleet and hail and all kinds of stuff, get out and play as much as you can in every condition.
Awesome. And I understand that you play a decent amount in windy weather as well, Chris.
Yes, quite a bit. Here in the Midwest, we get a lot of wind. I know there's wind all over the place, but in the Midwest, one of the things that I've experienced a lot is changing winds. 5 minutes later, the wind is coming from a completely different direction. Part of it's location, part of it's just the lakes all around Michigan, and you have no idea where the wind is going to come from next. So I get out there and I play through anything. I mean, especially where we are in the Midwest, you can't skip disc golf because the weather's so unpredictable around here. But like Tim said, just get out and play. The more you play in the rough conditions, the better you're going to be, no matter where you are. You playing 40, 50 mile an hour winds, you go up against a 5 to 10 mile an hour breeze. It's not nearly as scary.
Right. So let's break down the different parts of the game, and let's talk a little bit about disc selection, throw selection, shot shaping, all those different elements that go into creating a good round in a windy weather situation. So, guys, when you are on the tee, and let's say you're facing a headwind with your drive, what goes into selecting the disc out of your bag? What are you thinking? What kind of throw are you going to have into a headwind?
Well, one of the things that I look at, especially off the tee, is sometimes people go out and they play in the wind, and they'll want to compensate for the wind, and they'll fight it. And instead of fighting it and going, well, how can I get past the fact that this is a headwind? I guess I have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. I look at it as, how can that particular wind help you? You can use the wind to your advantage if you know what it does to your discs. And a headwind is a great example. So I carry the West Side World. The World it's a fast disc. It's thin and it's sharp, so it cuts through the wind a little bit better than a slower, kind of fatter disc. So it gives you more distance potential. But the nice thing is into the wind, the distance on your drive is created in the turn portion of its flight when it gets up to flat or a little past. Mm-hmm. And the nice thing about throwing the World into the wind is the wind keeps it in that turned portion, just slightly tilted over, longer than I can do it with no wind. So I can actually throw the World further into a headwind than I can throw my normal distance driver with no wind. And it's just a matter of learning to play the wind and finding a disc that works for you into the wind. So I actually kind of like it. Not necessarily gale force, but if I step up to the tee pad and there's a decent wind, I'm pretty confident I'm going to have a good drive because I know how to use the wind instead of trying to fight it.
Okay, right on. So you recommend into a headwind off the tee a fast disc that's very thin, and were you saying the world is a little understable for you?
It's overstable for me.
Oh,
So
overstable.
I would throw if whatever your normal driver is, throw something that's a little faster, a little lower profile, and a little bit more overstable than your normal driver is.
Okay.
Because the wind's going to make it like your disc is flying faster, like you had a bigger arm.
Oh,
So
yeah,
just
sure.
imagine, you woke up today and you could throw 50 to 100 feet further. What disc would you disc up to? That's the disc that you should throw into the wind.
Physics, science. Okay. What about you, Chris? So we're throwing off the tee, and we have a decent headwind coming our direction. What goes into your shot shaping and your disc selection?
The first thing I do is try to figure out what the wind is doing. As I mentioned, we get wind that comes from all different directions and changes. I know that if it's a light wind and suddenly it picks up, I know that's going to drastically change my flight. So the first thing I do is try to figure out how hard the wind is coming at me and if it's steady or gusting. If it's steady, I'm going to do something similar to what Tim said, but instead of using a faster driver, I'm going to throw my Discraft Crush. And I do that because it performs very, very well in a wind, in a headwind and a left to right crosswind. I've got some friends that'll swear by a Wraith. I've never been able to throw the Wraith as well as them, but it does similar to what they say their Wraith does in the headwind, where it'll turn just a little bit more than usual and it'll just glide forever. Just keeps going. Now, if the wind is gusty and I'm afraid of that affecting my flight, then I will grab a very overstable disc, fast one. I typically grab my Innova Excalibur, because that one, I can throw that one a pretty long ways, pretty straight, but it's very overstable toward the end of the flight. And this one's a Star Excalibur that's hit many trees and is broken in. So if I get a pretty good gust, it'll turn a little bit, but then it'll come back. I also consider laying up. As much as I hate to do that, I know there's some times where, especially if I've got a tight fairway, if there's trees on every side, sometimes I'll take something like my Viper, I'll throw it low, go for a little skip, and lay up, knowing that that's going to be better than ending up off in the weeds or behind trees. And that really comes into play when you got those gusts and you just have no idea what's going to happen. So for me, it's mostly about trying to predict what's going to happen and figure out the safest option.
So basically, the general consensus is if you have a strong headwind, a faster disc into the headwind, maybe a little bit more overstable, because the wind is coming at you. It's like you're throwing harder. That's interesting. I've never really thought and put all that together. But again, physics, science, disc golf.
Coming next week is Bill Nye's disc golf segment.
Yes. Something I don't normally do, but I started throwing a lot more Scoobies just to take the wind completely out of it. And people always ask me, and I threw the word Scooby a lot into my book, and I've had a lot of emails and things. I thought that was just a well-known term, but apparently it's not. So a Scooby is when you take your disc, you flip it on its back, and then you almost slide it toward the basket. It works well like on grass or something really flat, just to get it up there. But you completely take wind out of the equation when you do something like that. And might be another tip, another tool for somebody's tool bag out there if you're close enough. It's not exactly the most accurate thing, but as far as laying your shot up or just trying to get it up to the baskets.
That reminds me a lot too. There's one thing that the first few times I played in the wind that everybody told me that it's kind of just an overall thing, especially in a headwind. Keep your discs low. You don't want to get them way up into the air. If you keep your disc low, you minimize the possibility of damage by the wind. So if you do get a gust, it's not going to blow it that far away. There's nothing worse. I remember one time I was out before they redesigned our home course. There's a hole that you teed off on top of a hill and went over a valley, and then the basket was over on a hill across the valley. So it was kind of the long bomber hole, and just by the nature of the valley underneath, your disc is kind of high up in the air right off the tee. And I'll never forget one time we threw the disc, and the wind gust just picked it straight up in the air. I'm not kidding, probably 80 to 100 feet up in the air. And then it made an immediate left turn. It was kind of like those videos of the UFOs you see where the lights make a right turn in the sky.
Right.
And it must have gone, I mean, it left the course. It went 2 or 3 holes over a line of trees and into a soybean field.
That's a bad day.
It was crazy. Nobody could believe that it was like somebody up in the sky, like Zeus just picked up the disc and flicked it off the course and said, "You don't get to play with that one anymore."
Nice.
That makes me think of something that we deal with a lot, specifically at the MSU course, Michigan State University's campus, which is on the agricultural field, and it's mostly a wide open field, but there's some large hills. We learned pretty quickly that wind coming over hills does not act the same as wind that just goes across a flat plain. So if the wind is approaching a hill, it's going to actually be stronger at the top of the hill in most cases because all the wind at the bottom of the hill gets pushed up. So if there's a hill in the middle of the fairway and you're throwing right over it, expect the wind to do something different. And it's similar if you're throwing through a trough or a valley, there might not be any wind. So you got to consider where the wind is and what it's going to be doing when your disc passes over. So, if you throw through that valley, suddenly you come to an opening, or even thrown out of the woods into a wide open area, all of a sudden your disc might take off. So you got to plan for what the disc is going to do on the wind about halfway down your throw.
That brings up a good point about this. Just the sport in general is just how much thought that goes into each different step of trying to get this piece of plastic into that basket. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of people discredit disc golf, and just, as I mentioned a lot in my book, it's just a bunch of hippies throwing plastic in there, throwing Frisbees in the woods. And it's a whole lot like chess. You have to stop, take a breath, figure out your shot. You've got a limited amount of time to do that. So hopefully you have a decent amount of focus or ability to focus. And, do what you've trained your body to do and use the discs the way that they're intended. Okay, so what about a tailwind? If you're standing on the tee and you have a strong tailwind,
that for me, it's a couple of things. Number one, it's the opposite of the headwind. So I'll go to a slower, more glidey, understable disc. Okay. Because just like throwing into a headwind is like you were throwing the disc faster. It's the air resistance mimics that. When you're throwing at a tailwind, it mimics you throwing it slower. So, if you think back to when you first started playing and couldn't throw as far, your discs will start to fly more like that. So I'll throw something a little less stable so that it can get into that turn portion with less speed and kind of hold that turn portion. The other big thing for me for tailwind is it's a good way to diagnose whether you're throwing nose up or nose down. Typically the ideal way to throw a disc is perfectly flat or hopefully just with a tick of nose down. And if you do that in a tailwind, it's great because the tailwind will get under that disc and it'll kind of push it forward for you. But if you throw nose up at all, that wind is going to come up behind that disc and just slap it right out of the air. It's just going to drop like a rock. Same thing when you're putting in a tailwind. If you're putting nose up, that disc is going to get pushed down. If you putt a little bit nose down, it'll push it right into the chains for you. So, you always want to think about, if you're exposing the belly of the disc to the wind, what's that wind going to do? Is it something that's good for you, like in a tailwind where it's going to push it forward? Or is it something that's bad for you where, you don't want to show the belly of the disc to a headwind because it's going to slow it down and kind of push it offline? So that's kind of my thoughts on a tailwind throw.
Right. What do you think, Chris? Any additions?
Well, for the reasons that Tim just described, I typically grab a faster, more stable disc, which sounds odd, but I know that if I throw my less stable, more glidey discs, I'm a lot more likely to end off way to the left or way to the right because I'm having trouble controlling it. Now, if I'm really confident, sometimes I might take a disc like a lighter weight destroyer and fire that thing for the extra distance, but I know my game pretty well that I will typically take out something like my Viper, which doesn't glide much at all with a tailwind, and that thing is ridiculously overstable. And I'll throw something low and hard along the fairway and try to play it safe. That often will cost a stroke or two because you're not getting the same distance. But at least in my case, it's helped me stay more consistent. And we've got a hill, we've hole number 2 on our home course at Birchfield Park, the river's edge. You throw off the top of a toboggan hill, and quite often you have a tailwind. And there's so many times where I've thought, I'm just going to throw something right down the middle. And I have a lot of trouble controlling my discs in a tailwind. So I'll grab my Viper and just toss it down. And it's not nearly as fun, but that's the way I have to do it personally.
You bring up a real good point here, Chris, and you said play it safe, and that's something else I'd like to talk about. How weather changes our strategy. So maybe we're not in these windy conditions, in these adverse weather conditions. Maybe we're not playing the game exactly the same way. Maybe it's even just a new game to play. How much does weather change your strategy, Tim, when you go out on the course?
This is the second time that Chris mentioned it, and I think it's an awesome point. It's something that everybody needs to take into account. Your scores are going to be higher when you're playing in a lot of wind. It's true of tournaments. That's why when they figure the ratings, they figure your rating against the other people that played in the same round in the same weather conditions as you did, because the wind affects your scores. So, don't get frustrated when you go out there. If you normally have a hole that's, a 350-foot hole that you can bomb out and park on a normal day, and you're used to getting 2s and 3s, add a lot of wind, you're going to get 3s and 4s. And that's just the way that it's going to be. So, you're going to be a lot happier across the round if you understand that your scores are going to be a little bit higher. So that's one big thing, is just change your expectations a little bit. And as far as playing safe, you really want to, I think you put it best. You're really thinking about what's going to happen in that shot, where it's going to land, what kind of position it's going to put you in. And that's something that we haven't really talked about yet. But for me, as far as playing safe, one of the big things for me for playing safe is figuring out which side of the basket I want to land on in a high wind day, because I don't want certain winds on putts and approaches. So that's something I'm thinking about is, maybe I normally throw it and I hyzer into the basket and I land on the right side of the basket. But if that's going to leave me a real strong headwind putt, I might just throw it to the left of the basket instead. And even though I leave myself a longer putt, it's not into a 30-mile-an-hour wind.
Mind blown.
Science.
Physics. It goes even deeper. That's super cool, and that's another example of strategy and changing your strategy. And when you go out there and play this game, and I mentioned it a lot. We've mentioned it a lot in past podcasts, but also in the book, that you can't go into every situation with the same expectations, with the same tools. With this game, as with life, you have to assimilate into the situation. You can't use the same tools to do, different jobs. If you've been handed 10 nails and a hammer, just because you're handed a screw doesn't mean take the hammer to the screw. You have to change the tools out to do the job, and change the way that you think about it, and that's awesome. So how about putting tips? Let's talk a little bit about putting.
Sure. So Tim, you mentioned that that sometimes instead of going for the 30-mile-an-hour headwind, you'll go somewhere else, try to place it so you don't have to deal with that. So a lot of people think I'm crazy when I say this, but I would much rather putt into a straight, strong headwind than have to deal with a crosswind at any point. So the reason I say that is because I know exactly what my discs are going to do. We talked about sometimes changing your discs depending on the wind. Well, a lot of people I hear will say grab the heaviest, most overstable putter that you can find to fight the wind. And there are certainly times where that's going to be the best option. But if you know the wind and you know your putter, you might want to reconsider. So I will prefer to putt with my Gateway Magic, which is an understable putter, into a headwind, because I know if I throw that low and to the right, I'm right-handed, backhanded spin putter. If I throw that low and to the right, I know that the wind is going to lift my putter up, and I will be able to catch the bottom of the chains going up much better than if I'm thrown with a crosswind. The crosswind for me is much less predictable. So I know what my putter is going to do. And so I guess what I'm saying is go out and practice in the wind and figure out what your discs are going to do. I strongly recommend that you pick your putter based on feel. The problems is if you switch to a heavier and more stable putter, that can ruin the feel of your putting and throw your style completely off. So if you know how your normal putter is going to do in the wind, that can give you a huge advantage. Like I said, the headwind is going to lift your disc. A tailwind typically pushes your disc down. If you're able to throw the same disc in a headwind and a tailwind, just knowing where to aim, that's going to give you a huge advantage. And left-right is always difficult to determine, but it's really important that you know what your putter is going to do. And like I said, there's some times where you will want to fight it, especially if you got like 60-mile-an-hour winds. I've been there. You might want to take out your zone. That's great. But sometimes you really want to consider what the wind is going to do to your disc and play with the wind instead of fighting it.
Right on.
Chris, you brought up a point there that I think is really worth emphasizing. You're a spin putter, right?
Yes, correct.
So I'm a pitch putter.
Okay, that's different.
My pitch putts are typically a little bit nose down. So for me to putt into a headwind, that headwind doesn't allow me to get the disc to the basket very well.
That's going to drop your disc right away, won't it?
Yeah, for sure. When I putt in a tailwind, the wind just kind of pushes it along right into the chains for me. So I think people need to get out in the wind, and I think we haven't really said this yet. Well, we kind of started with it, but you got to get out and practice in the wind. You have to figure out what the wind does to your particular throw, your particular putt, your particular drive, and figure out how to use that to your advantage.
Excellent. So,
and if there's any turbo putters out there, that's another one even completely different. Turbo putting is my third style that I use for out of trouble. But if you've ever turbo putted in a wind, that your disc is off at strange angles, and that's even different to deal with. But if turbo putting is your main style, don't switch just because of the wind. At least try to figure out what it does in the wind.
Awesome.
So I've got a couple too. There's a couple unusual, unorthodox tips for putting in the wind that I think will help people, especially if they find themselves in extreme circumstances. Number one, learn to putt from your knees. Just like keeping your drives low and your approaches low, if you can keep your putts low, you would be surprised at how much it helps to putt from down low in the wind, especially for me in a headwind. But that really seems to help a lot of people. The other one, and I thought
how about in tailwind, the same thing as well, to keep the putts low as well?
For me, no, but I think it goes back to that nose angle thing. For me, putting in a tailwind, I'm fine up high because I'm using the wind to kind of push the disc into the chains.
Okay.
But when I'm putting into a headwind, I will sometimes get down on my knees, and that helps me a lot. And I'm not sure exactly why, but it seems to help, and I've seen other people do it. It works pretty well. The other one that I saw, which really kind of was weird at first, but I'll tell you, once you get the hang of it, learn to put the putter upside down, just like your Scooby reference. Learn to putt with the putter upside down. Putting upside down into the wind, you'd be surprised the wind doesn't affect your disc hardly at all. So if you can get used to putting with your putter upside down into the wind, it'll be like putting normally. It's really a neat trick to do.
Yeah, and that'll blow people's mind as well.
Yes. Get you some weird looks for sure.
And I like that you said to learn to putt on your knees too, because it's useful in so many situations. Under obstacles, a couple weeks back, the course was covered in ice, and I ended up having to putt from my knees a couple of times because I couldn't keep my balance on the ice. I dropped down to one knee just so I didn't fall over.
Right on. So, any other tips about windy disc golf play, guys?
Just go try it.
Awesome. So let me go ahead and sum up with what you guys kind of said. As far as coming off the tee with a headwind, try a fast, more overstable disc. Try to keep it low and don't fight the wind. Use the wind. Use the science. Use the physics. In a tailwind, Tim recommends a slower glidey disc, a little less stable, recommends to keep the nose down. Chris has a different approach, so the best idea is to go out and just play in the wind. Practice in the wind, know your discs in the wind, change your strategies and expectations. That's a huge point for this. Keep your putts low, learn to putt on your knees, and I'm going to have to go out there and try that whole putter upside down thing. I'm pretty sure that will blow some people's minds. So, unfortunately, we will have no debate today because Zach is not here. So I'm going to pour a little coffee on the floor for my homie. No, I'm not going to do that because
he's just chicken. Let's call it like it is.
Yeah,
He can't face it. He can't face it. He can't handle it.
Yeah,
That's
he
all.
totally backed out of this one. He knew that he was just beat. And the unfortunate part was I was going to have you guys use gangster rap references. So Chris brought up a really good point. Maybe we should have Tim battle himself today. What do you think, Tim?
I beat myself up every day on a normal basis. I don't know if no.
Hey everyone, now is as good a time as any to take a break and ask for your support in this podcast. In the past, we've had advertisers who help make this show possible, but in all effort to support the continuity of the Zen Disc Golf podcast, I am coming to you, my listeners, to ask you for help and keep this podcast going and growing. Success is an amazing thing, and I'm continually shocked, surprised, and humbled by the support of our listeners out there. And that's why I've tried to break free from the mold of traditional podcast advertising and come directly to you, my disc golf family, and ask for your support. As the show grows, it costs more dollars to keep it going. So if you love the show, all the amazing giveaways, guests, and hijinks, I just ask that you go to the notes of this cast, and either on zendiscgolf.com or through the podcast player, and consider donating $1 a month via PayPal to keep the thing you love going, growing, and flowing. It's as easy as clicking the notes in your podcast player and clicking the link. And let's be honest, would you miss $1? Would you miss the show? Once more, let me tell you what else is in it for you. At 50 regular subscribers, I'm going to choose one lucky subscriber a month to send a $20 gift card to Infinite Discs. This will be announced in the podcast. Each dollar you pledge monthly will get you another entry into the pool. So $1 is one entry and $3 is 3 entries. You get the point. Thank you to all of you who have already pledged. You guys and gals are amazing, and this show wouldn't exist without you. And now, back to the show. All right, so let's talk about what we're throwing in lieu of that. Tim, what are you throwing today?
You know, if you keep up with the blog, you've seen that I'm going to start here real soon a bag building series to really help people work their way through putting together a solid bag of plastic that's really going to serve them for a long time. And part of that is me going through my garage and really going through all of the discs that I've thrown over the years, and I've got an embarrassingly large amount of them. So what I pulled out the other day was one of my favorite discs from back in the day, which is a Millennium Polaris LS. And this is probably the first fairway driver that I ever really threw well. And I got to say, this thing is a really, really great disc. I like it in the base plastic. They just call it their Millennium plastic. I'm not sure, since they've changed ownership, if it's going to be the same feel as the ones that I've got in the garage. But the nice thing about this disc is I used to recommend this disc to beginners. It's a great disc to learn with. It's kind of like a Leopard as far as how it flies, but it's pretty stable. It holds the line that you put on it, so it won't turn over on you too much, even if you get a bigger arm. But if you put it on an anhyzer, it'll stay on an anhyzer. If you put it on a hyzer, it'll stay on that line. If you throw it flat and straight, it'll go flat and straight. It's got a decent amount of glide. You can get a surprising amount of distance out of it for a fairway driver. It's just super, super controllable, and it's great for teaching you, how to use a disc and how to get a bunch of different flights out of a disc. And if you're looking for one fairway driver to carry that will serve you in most situations, the Polaris LS is a great choice for that.
Right on. Okay. And Zach really likes the Millennium stuff too, so you're not alone in that. I know he would chime in and agree probably with that. Y'all have talked about that before in the past. Mm-hmm. What you got going on over there, Chris?
I have an Element Discs Iridium, one of their new putters. This one, I believe, was released in November. The numbers on this are 2302. So it's an overstable putter with fairly low glide. That's been pretty popular lately with putters like the Shield and the Scale. It is somewhat comparable to the Scale, not quite as overstable. It's almost like a Challenger with a little bit less glide and slightly more stable. This putter certainly prefers a fan grip because it's a slower disc. It doesn't like a ton of torque, but it's wonderful for approaches. It's slower than I prefer for driving, but it's great for straight approaches. It's got a predictable fade at the end. It also handles the wind very, very well, partly because of the low glide and partly because of the stability. When you throw this on an anhyzer line, it drops pretty quickly because of the low glide. But what's interesting to me is when you throw it on a hyzer line, it actually displays a little bit more glide. So you can launch this on a pretty good hyzer line. Great hyzer spike disc also. The plastic is somewhat similar to Gateway's Special Blend. It's fairly grippy, feels kind of chalky. It has one of those indented thumb tracks, which has been showing up more often, like the scale and the serpent have those indented thumb tracks. It's subtle enough that it doesn't really have much of an effect on me. It's close enough to the rim that I don't put my thumb on it, but it's a good marker to keep my thumb position in check. It also does not have a bead. I prefer no bead, so it's great for me. The iridium also has a very thin flight plate, and the advantage to that is when it hits something, the basket, a tree, the ground, it doesn't bounce very hard. It pretty much just drops. So I think that's a great feature. One thing to be aware is that the thin flight plate could cause the disc to break in sooner. This is more of a basic feeling plastic, so it might break down. I've been throwing this for around 4 months, and I've not had any trouble, but just beware of that. I also want to mention that I've got 2 iridium putters. I don't need to, so the putt heads are going to give one away. So
cool.
Make sure you're following Zen Disc Golf on Facebook, and then come find the Disc Golf Putt Heads Facebook page, and we'll have some information up on that in the next day or so.
Cool. If you send me some more info on that, I'll post it also on the Zen Disc Golf one as well.
Thanks, will do.
Everybody loves giveaways. Everybody loves free plastic. So, hey, and that brings up a good something I'd like to do another podcast about. Maybe we'll cover this next time, and that's grip. Because you mentioned a lot about grip, and I was also noticing on your blog that you had written something about the finger on the rim.
Yes, I did.
Post. So I think that may be something we could cover maybe next time. Just talk at length about grip.
It's highly subjective and very controversial, so that might even be a good debate.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm doing the Innova Valkyrie, and if you've listened to the past couple of podcasts, I've gone over a slew of just discs that are really good for beginners and easy to find. And so that was kind of my method of my madness. So I want to talk a little bit about the Valkyrie. Most people who are listening have probably seen one, thrown one, might have even been one of their very first discs in their bag. So just give you the numbers, speed 9, glide 4, turn negative 2, fade 2. With that negative 2, fade 2, it's a pretty straight flying disc. It's one of those discs that you can shot shape, do anything you need it to do. Great disc to learn on. I think it's a great disc for kids. A lot like the Leopard, very similar to the Leopard. So I would definitely recommend the end of a Valkyrie. I have a couple of them. I usually throw Champion plastic, and I really like the Champion stuff. So moving on, let's give some stuff away. We want to be just like Disc Golf Chris, and we want to give away some stuff. The first thing is the book giveaway, because every time we do a podcast, we try to give a book away, signed by yours truly, to somebody who left a 5-star review on Amazon for the book. And this review comes from Matthew Simpson on January 19, 2016. Worth every penny. I first heard about the book after seeing the Zen Disc Golf social media posts. Then I started listening to the podcast. Woohoo! Finally, buying the book and reading it reinforced all the points that were talked about on the podcast. It helped me change my thinking when on the course. I no longer get angry when I have a bad throw. I can laugh it off and focus on my next shot. Keeping a positive attitude and mindset is critical to succeeding in disc golf and life, and the book helps with both. Thank you very much, Matthew, and I'd love to sign a book and send it your way. So send me an email, zendiscgolf@gmail.com with your address and information, and I would love to send you a signed copy of Zen and the Art of Disc Golf. So every podcast, we also give away a new piece of plastic to somebody who's left a 5-star review for the podcast on iTunes. And today, I've got one heck of a disc here. I have an Innova Colt, and this is a first-run disc. It's like an orangish disc with you're familiar with the star stamp, the first run. God, I almost hate letting this one go, but I'm going to let it go because this guy wrote a long 5-star review for the podcast on iTunes. It says, "Greetings from Pennsylvania," and this is from Motoki1 from February 10th. "Greetings from Pennsylvania, the Germany of America." So he says, I mean that in the sense of our culinary wealth and ethnic heritage of many Pennsylvanians, not the Nazis. Okay. So I found the
That's good to
podcast.
know.
Yeah, right. I found the podcast as I was learning about the sport last year and found it entertaining and educational with tons of tips. From there, I picked up the book, proceeded to devour it. With new episodes coming up, I dropped the podcast I'm listening to and listened to that one first. This podcast has taught me many numerous ways to approach the game and practice strategy, how to play in the winter, how to play with fewer and slower discs, how to care and how not to care. It also it also teaches how not to give up and to always play. As a heavy music fan, the intro is pretty rockin', and I can relate to Patrick somehow harnessing that musical intensity into meaningful disc golfing. Who doesn't want to hear Slayer on the course, even if it's only in your head? It took a while to get used to the addition of additional hosts beyond the original two, but eventually grew on me, and I look forward to hearing everybody chime in, especially the sardonic wit of the ticklish hamster. The "What are you throwing" segment is especially helpful for learning the names and characteristics of numerous discs without having to throw them, and how the same disc reacts to different players. Interviews are keeping the show fresh, and I look forward to hearing from some pro players on the show. Keep up the good work, guys. So, MotoKey 1, I want to send you this first run in of a Colt to add to your bag or to your shelf. I don't know. It's such a pretty looking disc. Some people like to save these first run discs just as display discs. But MotoKey, if you email me zendiscgolf@gmail.com, I'll be happy to send that disc your way. And thank you so much for that 5-star rating on iTunes. So, episode 20, guys.
The science episode.
The science, physics, disc golf. So, as always, follow Zen Disc Golf, Mind Body Disc, and DG Puttheads on all of the social media and join in the fun. Get out there, play in the weather, play in the wind. Hopefully, we gave you some tips to help you with that. But always remember, most importantly, just throw. Follow Disc. So, as always, follow Zen Disc Golf on all of the. I'm screwing up.